trying to keep up with everything, like the safety of our medicines, our food, medical devices, it can feel pretty overwhelming sometimes. There's just so much information out there.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's tempting, isn't it, to just grab this simple headline. But you understand, there's usually a much richer story, a bigger picture.
Exactly. That's what we're getting into today.
So today, we're really going beyond the surface. We're doing a deep dive into how pharmaceuticals, food, and medical devices are regulated here in the U.S.
Right. And this deep dive, it's really for, for you listening, anyone who wants to quickly but thoroughly get a handle on what's essential in these regulations.
A shortcut to what really matters.
Kind of, yeah. We want to offer a clear path. We're drawing on sources like who is behind the regulation of pharma, food, and medical devices.
Okay.
And our mission really is to shed light on just how extensive and importantly interconnected the FDA's role is in protecting public health across these key areas, and maybe bust a few myths along the way.
All right, sounds good. Let's jump right in then. So the FDA, when people hear that, I think the first thing that pops into their head is drug approvals. Am I right?
That's definitely the most common association, and it's a huge part of what they do, no doubt.
But not the whole story.
Not by a long shot. What's really striking, especially when you look at the source material, is just the sheer breadth of their responsibilities. It's so much more than just being a pharmaceutical guard.
Okay.
It's really the central player, the linchpin in this whole system, covering our food supply safety, making sure medical devices work and are safe, and even regulating products that emit radiation.
Radiation-emitting products.
Wow, okay, that's not something I immediately think of with the FDA. What kind of things fall under that?
Well, think about everyday things like microwave ovens, or more specialized things like medical x-ray machines, imaging equipment. The FDA sets safety standards for those too.
So it really touches a lot of areas. It does. And if you look back, historically, starting with the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act way back when and moving forward, you see this constant evolution. The rules, the frameworks, they adapt.
Adapt to what? New technologies.
Exactly. New technologies, new health threats. It's a dynamic process. These aren't just old rules sitting on a shelf collecting dust.
So they're constantly being updated, refined.
Precisely. And that adaptation is, well, it's crucial. It ensures the products we rely on every day are not just effective, but also safe, keeping pace with innovation. Understanding that dynamic aspect is key to seeing the bigger picture,
Okay, got it. So let's circle back to pharmaceuticals then. Obviously, huge scrutiny there. What are the key things we need to understand about how drugs are regulated?
Right. So the source material really emphasizes that it's a very thorough, multi-stage process. It's not just like one checkpoint.
Not just a single thumbs up or thumbs down.
No, not at all. It involves really extensive clinical trials, several phases actually. Then there's meticulous analysis of all that data, and critically, post-market monitoring.
Post-market. So the scrutiny doesn't end even after a drug is approved and available.
Absolutely not. That monitoring continues. There's a really strong focus on understanding both the immediate benefits, the efficacy, and any potential long-term consequences or side effects that might emerge later.
That makes sense.
And what's really critical here, I think, is the balance the FDA tries to strike. They want to foster innovation, right? Encourage the development of new, potentially life-saving treatments.
Sure.
But at the same time, they have to guarantee safety and trustworthiness. And that continuous oversight, that post-market surveillance is how they do it. It's about making sure scientific breakthroughs actually translate into safe, tangible benefits for patients.
A safety net, but one that still allows for progress. Okay, now let's pivot to food safety. We often hear about, say, restaurant inspections or factory inspections. Is that basically it?
Inspections are definitely part of it, yeah. But the FDA's role in food safety is much broader than just spot checks.
How so?
They set really stringent standards for making sure food is free from harmful contaminants, that it's labeled correctly so you know what you're buying, and that it's produced under sanitary conditions.
So setting the rules of the game, basically.
Exactly. Like, think about requirements for temperature controls along the supply chain or tracking systems. These things have dramatically cut down on outbreaks like salmonella. That's a direct result of these kinds of standards. Real-world impact.
So it's proactive. Setting standards to prevent problems before they happen, not just reacting.
Absolutely. Prevention is a huge part of it. Their work also includes ongoing surveillance, checking both imported foods and stuff produced domestically, and they work closely with manufacturers too.
Collaboration, not just enforcement.
Right. And here's something interesting our source points out. These regulations, they don't just fix immediate problems, they actually tend to drive lasting improvements in how food is made. They can push manufacturers to innovate, but in ways that are safe and compliant.
Huh. That's a really interesting take. Regulation as a driver of positive change, not just a barrier. Okay, now, medical devices. That's such a huge category. I mean, from a simple tongue depressor to a complex pacemaker. How on earth does the FDA handle that diversity?
Yeah, you're right. The range is incredible. So they use a risk-based approach. They basically sort devices into 3 classes.
Based on risk.
Exactly. Class I is for low-risk devices. Things like tongue depressors, like you said, or maybe elastic bandages, simple handheld surgical tools. These are subject to what are called general controls.
General controls.
Yeah.
Meaning basic safety requirements.
Pretty much basic manufacturing standards, proper labeling, that kind of thing, foundational stuff.
Okay, makes sense for low-risk items. What about the next level?
That's Class 2. These are moderate-risk devices. Think infusion pumps, powered wheelchairs, maybe some diagnostic tests.
Okay.
These need general controls plus what they call special controls. These are extra requirements specific to the device type, maybe performance standards, specific testing, guidance documents.
Tailored rules for the specific risks.
Precisely. And most Class 2 devices go through what's called the 510K pre-market notification process.
510K, what does that involve?
Essentially, the manufacturer has to show that their new device is substantially equivalent to a device that's already legally on the market.
Substantially equivalent, meaning it's basically the same in terms of safety and how it works?
Yeah, that's the core idea. It doesn't have to be identical, but it has to be comparable in safety and intended use.
Right.
A new type of blood pressure monitor would need to show it's as safe and effective as existing monitors.
Okay, I think get that. So what's the highest risk category then?
That would be Class 3. These are typically devices that support or sustain human life, or they present a potentially high risk of illness or injury. Think implantable pacemakers, heart valves, things like that.
Right, the really critical stuff.
Exactly. And these face the most rigorous review. They require what's called pre-market approval, or PMA.
PMA. And that involves?
That involves submitting extensive scientific evidence, usually including clinical trial data, to prove the device is safe and effective for its intended use. It's a much higher bar than the 510K.
That tiered system definitely seems logical. Match the scrutiny to the risk. Now, you mentioned something earlier, an investigational device exemption, IDE. What's that about?
Ah, yes, the IDE. That's actually really important for innovation.
How so?
It allows companies to use a novel device in clinical studies on people before it gets full marketing approval. So it's for gathering that crucial safety and effectiveness data.
But under strict rules, I assume.
Oh, absolutely, under very strict safety protocols and ethical oversight. The IDE process, while demanding, is vital. It gives researchers a controlled way to test groundbreaking devices in the real world. Sometimes it can even speed up getting truly innovative therapies to patients who need them.
So it's a way to carefully test the cutting edge while keeping safety paramount. That really pushes back against the idea that regulation just stifles new ideas.
Exactly. It shows there's a mechanism designed to manage the introduction of innovation responsibly. And all of this, these different pathways, they exist within a bigger system.
It's not just the FDA working in a vacuum then.
No, definitely not. It's a whole ecosystem built over decades. Legislation, policy changes. Our source material mentions key laws like the 1976 Medical Device Amendments and the Safe Medical Devices Act of 1990. These were landmark pieces of legislation. They really shaped the modern system for how devices are tested and regulated, made it much more comprehensive.
And that risk-based classification system we just talked about, class 1, 2, 3, that came out of that evolution.
Absolutely. That was a major development. It ensures that even the simplest devices meet minimum safety standards, while the high-risk ones get that intense PMA scrutiny.
You also mentioned clinical evaluation. Kind of beyond just the formal approval paths. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's about making sure these devices don't just look good on paper or in controlled trials, but actually provide real benefit to patients in the real world.
How do they ensure that?
Well, there's a big emphasis on the quality of the clinical evidence. Sometimes studies can be designed better than others, so the focus is on really well-designed trials.
Like using randomization, blinding.
Exactly. Things like randomization, blinding to reduce bias, and measuring what really matters to patients' direct clinical endpoints, like improved survival or better quality of life, not just, say, changes in a lab value.
So generating solid proof of tangible patient benefits.
That's the goal. And the system shows its flexibility again with things like the IDE process we discussed. It allows the regulations themselves to kind of adapt as technology evolves, enabling that real-world testing, but within safety guardrails.
Okay, so we've talked about pharma, food, medical devices. They sound like separate domains with their own rules. But are they really totally separate? Or are there connections?
That's a really important question. And no, they're not truly separate. While they have distinct rules, these sectors are definitely interdependent. Progress in one area often helps another.
Can you give an example?
Sure, think about those advanced drug delivery systems we mentioned earlier, like smart insulin pumps.
Right, the ones that combine the drug and the device.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of pharmaceutical know-how meeting device technology innovation. You couldn't have one without the other.
That's a very clear connection. Are there others?
Well, yeah. Think about basic safety standards. Both the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry have incredibly strict requirements around things like aseptic processing, keeping things sterile, contamination control, quality control checks. There are a lot of parallels in the underlying principles of safe manufacturing.
So shared standards.
Shared principles, definitely. And this fosters, cross-disciplinary learning and cooperation. When you apply consistent science-based standards across these areas, you create this synergistic system. It benefits public health overall. Think about dietary supplements, too.
Where do they fit?
Well, they're often seen as separate, but the FDA regulates their labeling and manufacturing using principles drawn from both food safety and pharmaceutical quality control. It shows that overlap again.
So really about building this interconnected system where safety and innovation are prioritized across the board, not just siloed off in separate sectors.
You got it. And it's that interconnectedness, that bigger system view, that often gets missed in quick news hits, which brings us nicely to tackling some common misconceptions about the FDA.
Okay, good idea. Let's debunk some myths. What's a major one people often get wrong?
I think the biggest one is probably the idea that the FDA just approves medicines. Full stop.
Right, we started there.
Yeah. But as we've seen, their job is so much bigger. Food safety, making sure medical devices work correctly and safely, and drug efficacy and safety. It's multidimensional.
Okay, so myth one. FDA is just about drugs. Debunked. What's another one?
Another related one is maybe underestimating the scope of their authority. People might think it's limited.
But it's not.
No. As we said, it covers pharmaceuticals, food, cosmetics, medical devices, those radiation-emitting products. It's a very wide net. And that's not about being overly bureaucratic. It's a strategic way to manage potential risks across many different areas that affect our health.
It really is a surprisingly diverse portfolio when you list it all out. Okay, here's one I could see people thinking. Maybe medical devices are just inherently safer than drugs. Less risk involved.
That's an understandable thought, especially for things like Class I devices, but it's not universally true. Remember those Class 3 devices?
The high-risk ones, pacemakers and such?
Right. They undergo that really intensive pre-market approval, the PMA process. The level of scrutiny there is very high, comparable in rigor to drug approvals, just tailored to the complexities of devices. So you can't just assume all devices are low risk.
Good point. Okay, what about the classic one? Regulation stifles innovation. Does the FDA just slow everything down?
That one persists, doesn't it? But it's really a mischaracterization, especially when you look at things like the IDE process.
The investigational device exemption.
Yes. That process actually facilitates innovation, but it does so responsibly. It creates a framework built on trust and safety. By allowing those carefully controlled clinical trials and requiring ongoing monitoring, the FDA provides a clear pathway for new technologies to be tested, refined, and ultimately brought to market safely.
So less of a roadblock, more like guardrails on the road to progress.
That's a great way to put it, exactly. The regulatory system in the U.S., it's not meant to be just an obstacle. It's designed to foster a culture of safety, of responsibility, of continuous improvement. It's trying to find that sweet spot protecting public health while still enabling life-enhancing innovations.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. If you had to boil it down, what's the single most important takeaway from our deep dive today?
I'd say the key takeaway is that the U.S. system for regulating pharmaceuticals, food, and medical devices is, it's complex, yes, but it's also vital, deeply interconnected, and importantly, adaptive. And it's all fundamentally geared towards safeguarding public health.
And those processes, the different pathways, the scrutiny, while they might look bureaucratic from the outside, they're actually driven by a really strong commitment to safety, to making sure things work and to enabling innovation, but doing it responsibly.
Precisely. And we really hope this deep dive has given you, our listeners, a clearer, more nuanced picture of this whole regulatory world. Hopefully it goes beyond just the simple headlines and sound bites.
Absolutely. It's been fascinating to really unpack it all. And maybe here's a final thought for everyone listening to chew on. Just take a moment to consider all the everyday things you rely on. You know, the food you ate for breakfast, any medicines you take, maybe even a medical device somebody you know uses. Think about the unseen work, the scientific rigor, the layers of oversight that go into making sure those things are safe and effective. This whole regulatory landscape we've been talking about, it might operate mostly behind the scenes, but it's absolutely fundamental to the trust we place in these products every single day. It really underpins our well-being in ways we probably don't even realize.
Thank you, viewers, for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with your colleagues. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel by clicking that subscribe button below so you never miss out on valuable insights. I'm Brian Edmonds, signing off. See you in the next one.